14-year-old Danika Troy was reported missing as another heartbreaking runaway case. But police now say she didn't run away. She was murdered. And the suspects' identities are shocking. We have the newly revealed details that are horrific. A planned shooting, a body set on fire, and a confession to a secret witness. Now the victim's mom is telling a different story about what she says really lured her daughter into the woods that night. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. Hey guys, before we get into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about our partner Upside. It gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. Upside is easy and it's free to use. I often use it when I pump gas or go to 7-Eleven or even a place like Taco Bell. And we're talking about real cash back. So after you spend money, it appears in your Upside account and then you can transfer it straight to your bank. So what do you do now? Download the Upside app for free, buy whatever you plan to. Pay like you typically would with a debit or credit card, then file a claim in the app and you get money back. So to find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on our screen and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. A 14-year-old girl was reported missing by her mom, originally believed to be a runaway. But just days later, the worst has been confirmed. And now the details of what police say really happened to this girl are coming out. And it's just incredibly sad and horrific. Police say the girl, 14-year-old Danika Troy, was not a runaway. Instead, she was allegedly targeted by two of her classmates, one 14 years old, the other 16 years old. And they are both accused of luring Danika into the woods, shooting her, and then setting her body on fire. Now, we have obtained the arrest affidavit here at Law&Crime, and it spells out a planned killing and a scene that is so gruesome that the sheriff called it one of the worst he has ever seen.
And this is where it gets really horrific, actually. They developed two suspects, one a 14-year-old boy and another one a 16-year-old boy. The 16-year-old boy, Gabriel Williams, stole his mother's handgun and shot Danika Troy. Kamari Blevins is the 14-year-old. Put their pictures up. They are currently at DJJ. They're being held on first-degree premeditated murder charges. And here's where it even gets worse. It's bad enough you kill a 14-year-old. You're 14, you're 16. Shoot her multiple times, then they set her on fire.
Now the sheriff says he's pushing to have both of these two teenagers, 14-year-old Kamari Blevins and 16-year-old Gabriel Williams, tried as adults. But the biggest question right now, it's the why, and in some ways, it is still a mystery. The sheriff says there isn't a clear motive, and even though the two boys did allegedly give a motive, the sheriff says just does not fit the facts of this case. And the victim's mom is offering a different story, one of a young girl who just wanted to be in love for Christmas, and the betrayal that she says followed that. Now, this tragedy unfolded the Sunday after Thanksgiving, November 30th, in Pace, Florida. That night, it was around 10 o'clock. And Danika Troy's mother, Ashley, says that she saw her 14-year-old daughter for the last time. She says everything seemed normal that night, but by the next morning, Danika and her black and red electric scooter were gone. Her mother filed a runaway report. At a press conference, Sheriff Bob Johnson of the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office outlined a tragic timeline.
On December 1st, around 7 a.m., Danika Troy, a 14-year-old, was reported as a runaway by her mother in Pace, Florida. Unbeknownst to the mother, unfortunately, Danika was murdered the previous night. On December 2nd, deputies in Pace responded to a dead body call off of Kimberly Road. Detectives were called out and hit the ground running.
So a day after she's reported missing, a passerby finds a body in the woods off of Kimberly Road. Detectives rush to the scene, and what they found is just horrific. A burned body in a pathway. One white and blue Nike shoe is still on the victim's right foot. And there are spent 9mm bullet casings and live rounds scattered around. Now, nearby, there is a black and red electric scooter, and that description matches exactly what Danika had with her when she disappeared. The sheriff says that his major crimes unit moved fast, and within days, they had two suspects.
So December 2nd, they get out there, they start the investigations, and this is where it gets really horrific, actually. They developed two suspects, one a 14-year-old boy and another one a 16-year-old boy. The 16-year-old boy, Gabriel Williams, stole his mother's handgun and shot Danika Troy. Kamari Blevins is the 14-year-old. Put their pictures up. They are currently at DJJ. They're being held on first-degree premeditated murder charges. And here's where it even gets worse. It's bad enough you kill a 14-year-old. You're 14, you're 16. Shoot her multiple times, then they set her on fire.
So the allegations are stark. Two classmates, one 16, one just 14 years old, planned this. One allegedly stole the gun. They shot Danika multiple times and then, in an effort to destroy evidence, set her body on fire. Both teens are in juvenile detention right now. They're being held without bond. But the sheriff says a big piece is still missing, and that is a clear motive.
Right now, there's not a clear motive. They have been interviewed, but the motive that they're giving doesn't fit the forensics or any facts of the case. So we don't have a legit motive. But I can tell you this, we're going to be hopefully working with the state attorney's office to get these individuals charged as adults. You do an adult crime, you need to do adult time.
The sheriff wouldn't detail what the boys claimed, only that it doesn't fit the forensic evidence. But his stance on having these two prosecuted as adults remained clear. So that's the core of the case from law enforcement's perspective. A brutal, premeditated killing with a motive that's still a puzzle. But now Danika's mom is speaking out in an exclusive interview. And she's telling a very different story about what led her daughter into the woods that night. Now we're going to have that for you in just a moment. But before we get into that, I want to walk you through the evidence that got these two teenagers arrested. Now, we've obtained that probable cause affidavit, and it fills in chilling new details about the night of the murder and a tip from a mysterious witness that broke this case open. Now, it started with the initial missing persons report. And as we mentioned earlier, according to the affidavit, Danika's mom, Ashley Troy, last saw her daughter on Sunday, November 30th. It was around 10 o'clock at night. And then she wakes up the next morning around 6:50 a.m. and Danika and her black and red electric scooter were gone. She provided deputies with a photo and a description of what Danika was wearing, a black jacket with white and blue Air Force One Jordans. But by the next day, the search turned into a death investigation. The affidavit details what a sergeant found when he responded to a wooded area off Kimberly Road on December 2nd. I walked approximately 50 yards into the wooded area before observing the area to indicate there was a fire recently. The trees, grass, and brush showed signs of being burned to include being black in color. I walked down the path to the right and walked approximately 20 yards and observed a burned body on the ground in the pathway. Now, the scene was littered with evidence. The affidavit notes, quote, just behind the body was a large charger to an unknown electronic. There were multiple live ammunition rounds located within the vicinity of the body to include spent casings. This ammunition was identified as 9mm, but a key piece of evidence for identification was still on the victim. The officer noted, quote, I observed the body to have one shoe on the right foot, which was a white and blue colored Nike. Now, nearby detectives located and seized a black scooter with red trim. The description matched the one that Danika's mom said was missing. The affidavit then details that there was a break in the case when a person came forward. A cooperating witness, referred to only as CW1, came forward on December 3rd. CW1 stated that the 14-year-old suspect, Kamari Blevins, asked to speak with them privately and then confessed. Here's what CW1 told detectives according to the document. Quote, he and Gabriel Williams planned the murder of Danika. The initial plan was to shoot Danika once, but Gabriel continued shooting. They then burned Danika's body and left the area. This allegedly happened the same night Blevins was caught sneaking back into his home on Parkview Street. Armed with this information from CW1, detectives went to question Blevins. And after receiving permission from his mom, they interviewed him in a patrol car. And after being read his Miranda rights, Blevins said he hadn't spoken to Danika since a falling out over Thanksgiving break and that he had blocked her on social media. But when the detective asked about the wooded area off of Kimberly Road, the affidavit states, quote, Kamari requested a lawyer be present. Questioning ended, and Kamari was placed under arrest. The affidavit also sheds light on the 16-year-old suspect, Gabriel Williams. After being brought in for questioning and read his rights, Williams allegedly told detectives that Danika had made hurtful comments to him, calling him, quote, worthless and a gangbanger, which he says upset him. Portions of what followed that comment are redacted, so we can't be certain exactly what happened after that, but in the end, detectives say they tied it all together. They cited the cooperating witness's statement, the matching scooter, and the matching clothing description. The affidavit concludes, quote, "It is reasonable to believe the deceased is Danika Troy and her death is a result of the planned shooting and burning of her body by Kamari Adam Blevins by carrying out the plan of shooting and burning the body of Danika Troy." So the affidavit paints a picture of a coordinated plan. But this official law enforcement narrative about a social media feud leading to murder is now facing a powerful contradiction from the person who knew Danika best, and that is her mom. Danika's mom, Ashley Troy, is now speaking out. She did an interview with People magazine. She also did an interview with the New York Post. And Troy says that this wasn't about a social media argument or hurtful comments. She says that her 14-year-old daughter was lured. She says that Danika had a crush on the 16-year-old suspect, Gabriel Williams. But according to Ashley, Williams only pretended to reciprocate those feelings. She told the New York Post, quote, "Gabe pretended to have feelings for her. That's how she was lured." Ashley Troy told People magazine that Danika had snuck out of the house that night to simply be with the boy that she had a crush on. She told the outlet, quote, "Kids just don't think about consequences. She trusted him. It wasn't hard to lure her. He had her heart. She would do anything for him." Now that is obviously incredibly a sad development to this tragic story. But now, just to be clear, this is Ashley Troy's version of events as she told it to media outlets, but we have no confirmation on this information from police at this time. Ashley Troy also told the New York Post that the explanation from the boys about a feud just doesn't make sense to her. But despite that, and despite wanting justice, she told the New York Post that she doesn't actually blame the boys in the way that one might expect. She said, quote, "I don't blame those boys. I blame evil influence. I don't hate them. I hate what they did to my baby." But her grief is anchored in the simple, heartbreaking truth she says about her daughter's state of mind. She told People magazine, quote, "She just wanted to be in love for Christmas." So now we have two different narratives in a lot of ways. The official investigation pointing to this premeditated plan born out of a personal dispute, but the victim's mom describes a cruel deception where her daughter's hope and trust were the tools used to lead to her death. Now, the community has rallied around this family. A GoFundMe has been set up to cover funeral costs, and as the legal process begins to move, with the sheriff pushing for adult charges, this fundamental question of why may be what haunts this case the most. Join us now to talk a little bit more about where this case could go from here is criminal defense attorney John Day. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us. Seems like this sheriff in Florida, he is pretty determined to see these two suspects be charged and tried as adults. One is 14, one is 16. Though the sheriff wants that, typically what goes into whether that actually happens?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. So yeah, this sort of highlights the issues involving juvenile justice in America. You've got a horrific, incredibly horrific murder of a sweet young 14-year-old girl. You've got a 14-year-old suspect, a 16-year-old suspect charged with premeditated first-degree murder, meaning that the prosecutors believe that they had this intent ahead of time. And so what happens is you've got a clash of the juvenile justice system and the adult system. Remember, children's court, the juvenile justice system is generally aimed at rehabilitating kids who are shoplifting or, committing minor crimes. But the problem is that lately in America, you've seen young kids who normally would not be involved in the adult system. Suddenly they're accused of the most heinous crime imaginable. That's what's happening here. And so the juvenile system is generally aimed at rehabilitating kids, trying to get them into treatment, trying to keep them out of the adult system. The adult system, very different. It's locking people up, less emphasis on rehabilitation. And suddenly when you have kids crossing that line into the adult system, you've got this situation that we have in Florida where you've got 14 and 16-year-olds who are, the sheriff is saying they ought to be tried as an adult. And a lot of people would support that because the nature of the crime is not juvenile, the nature is adult.
And to think, of what they're accused of. I know the mom has said it was, them luring her daughter to the woods where she was killed. Police, law enforcement believe that it could have been something to do with some sort of social media back and forth. The truth is they knew each other. And not only just shooting her to death, allegedly, but to also set her body on fire. It's just absolutely horrific. With the suspects being, one is 14, and one's 16. I think we see a lot of cases where 16-year-old ends up being tried as an adult, but 14 is still incredibly young. How does the age, though like in the words of the sheriff it is, you do an adult crime, you need to do adult time, what's typically the cutoff to where even for the most horrific crime, someone can be tried and charged as an adult?
Well, it depends on the state, depends on the jurisdiction, but the bottom line is, society has recognized that if you're 12, 13, 14, even 15, your brain is still mush. You still are forming as a human being, and the judgment, the frontal lobes in your brain where all your judgment is contained are not really formed, and not for many years, actually. So you've got a 14-year-old who we're now going to be holding that person accountable as an adult. A lot of people agree with that because of what, including the sheriff, based on what he said, that this is a heinous crime. It's a crime that normally teenagers are not committing. And so when that does happen, the sheriff and a lot of other people would say, we've got to address that as an adult crime. The problem is that, as you said, there's a cutoff. At some point, the courts have said, does a 14-year-old, does a 13-year-old, what is the judgment that's going on in their head that lets them engage in this kind of activity? So courts are going to look at this. They're going to say, is this child who committed an adult crime, is it appropriate? Is it just? Is it fair to try them as an adult? Or do we keep them in the juvenile system because they have not reached that level of comprehension and judgment that we expect of adults? So it depends on the state. But it's really one of the thorniest questions in the juvenile justice system when you've got an incredibly horrific crime like this, and then you've got a 14-year-old. And as you said, apparently these were classmates. Apparently there was some sort of even the girl may have had a crush on one of them. I mean, it brings tears to your eyes to read and hear and listen to the facts around this murder. But at the same time, now you've got the juvenile system coming up against the adult system, and these are really tough questions for courts, for prosecutors, for lawyers and judges to try to pick apart.
Yeah, and it seems like the state of Florida, and I know it goes county by county, but has been pretty aggressive when it comes to cases involving young people. I know there's a sheriff in another county that'll post a video of I think a 12-year-old making threats at a school, and will post that, even knowing their identity. There are some states, I think of a place like California, you probably won't learn the identity of a suspect if they're, under the age of 18 or 16, but certainly not in the state of Florida. We look at this case too, John, and on one hand you have police saying they don't really know what the motive may be, the reason that the suspects were giving them, they don't think it really adds up. The mom gives interviews believing that her daughter had a crush on Gabriel Williams, who's the 16-year-old, and that's incredibly tragic if that's true. From the defense's perspective, as they mount their case, the fact that there isn't, it seems, a definitive why as this would actually happen, how does that impact how the defense builds their case?
Well, that's sort of the heart of the defense. You've got to figure out if you are defending, if you're put in that position of, your job as a defense lawyer is to try to provide a competent defense to one or both of these young men, you've got to look at what's going on, what's the backstory, what's going on in their heads. I mean, what's going on psychologically and their mental state. And again, on the surface, on the face of it, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around it. It's just completely irrational, tragic, heartbreaking murder of the sweet 14-year-old who apparently, again, there was some type of romantic angle. Maybe she had a crush on one of them. It's sort of unclear right now, but at the end of the day, that just adds to the tragedy of this thing. So defending it, you've got to establish some type of reason that they are not culpable in the sense of an adult being culpable for a premeditated murder or something that lessens that seriousness of that charge. Because, when you look at a 14-year-old who has access to a handgun and that handgun is used in a murder, I mean, there are a lot of parts you've got to pick apart. There are a lot of steps, like what's the environment that kid was raised in? Why don't they know the difference between right and wrong? I mean, that's sort of the heart of any of these cases. It's why do these teenagers think that they can engage in that kind of activity? And, I saw one story, it said that the mom had said that she didn't blame the kids necessarily, even though they ought to be held accountable, but she blamed what she called evil influences. And you think about that in the general term of social media and the role that social media plays in teenagers' lives. And it's just heartbreaking to see something like this happen. But unfortunately, you're seeing it more and more often.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about cases. It seems regularly. You hear, even if it's a kid who, a very different situation, but if it's like a shooting plot at a school, like, and that was thwarted, or God forbid it happens, it just seems like a lot of these cases, and when you cover true crime, like, I mean, it's just, you're going to cover those stories, but it just seems often and often, it's just people who don't recognize, this kid, 14 years old, if he's found guilty of murder, he is going to adult prison in Florida, for the rest of his life potentially. That's just, not thinking of the repercussions of any of this is just horrific. But it's innocent until proven guilty. It seems like there's a confidential witness that came forward to law enforcement. That's kind of at the crux of their case. For the defense, how can you learn who that person is, and then how does that factor into potentially how you defend your client if it seems to really hinge on what they allegedly told this person who we don't know their identity?
Right. Well, again, picking that apart, if you are defending the suspects, the really young suspects, that's something for a court to decide. Do you get access to the person who actually provided this information? Does it seem legitimate? Is there an axe to grind? Does this seem like, you're doing your own investigation from the defense side? You're trying to see, did the police do the job that they needed to do? Is there anything here that wasn't done properly that's that the defense can use to their advantage? But something like a confidential informant, a witness, somebody like that who doesn't want to be identified, ultimately that can come out if it's necessary, if a court decides that the defense needs to get that. And so that's one part of a defense. Again, the other part is going to be deciding or figuring out what the history is of these teenage boys, basically barely teenage boys in the case of one of them. So you're not trying to obviously excuse what they did. You're trying to understand what was taking place so that if you are defending it, you can at least make a case that this is not just an evil adult who goes out and murders somebody. These are really children, if you're taking the defense side, who engaged in an incredibly heinous act. But why did that take place, and what was going on in their lives? Defending it, you've got to do everything you can to give them the defense that they're entitled to. It's a horrific case, though, and you can't lose sight of this sweet young girl who was the victim and what her family's going through. So that's what makes these cases so heartbreaking and so hard from a defense lawyer side.
No, absolutely. And I just think of her mom waking up in the morning not knowing where her daughter is, and then to find this out, and to think that it might have been a runaway situation, but it ends up being that she's the victim of a murder. Moving forward in this case, when it comes to, if this goes to trial, if they're found guilty, I mean, the fact that, say, for the 14-year-old, Kamari Blevins, I know I said, like, oh, he's going to go to Florida prison for the rest of his life, but is that kind of the reality, even on a murder charge? Like, does the fact that even though you're being tried as an adult, if you're found guilty of that type of crime, is there any difference because you are so young, under the age of 18, when it happened? Yeah,
there's a difference. It depends on the jurisdiction, depends on the state, but a lot of situations, if you have a young defendant who's convicted, you don't necessarily put a 14-year-old in an adult prison right away. There are various juvenile facilities that they can be put into until they reach a certain age, and it's a horrifying prospect that this kid, who's barely has the consciousness of a teenager, suddenly is looking at a life in prison, and that's looking at this from the defense side. Again, not losing sight of the tragedy of this young 14-year-old girl and her family, that what they're going through. And I've done plenty of prosecution time as a prosecutor, and I certainly understand that side of it. But this is not normal behavior for 14, even though it seems like it's becoming more and more normalized. It's not normal behavior for a 14-year-old boy or a 16-year-old boy to get a gun, as they are alleged to have done, and lure this sweet girl out to the woods. You don't know what that was about. Was it the promise of some type of nice encounter? Were they what was going on there? But she went out there apparently, and then according to the sheriff, they shot her and then tried to burn her body. So could not be a more horrific set of facts, but it's not happening in a vacuum. There's something going on in the lives of those the two young boys who are accused of the murder that you've got to pick apart as a defense lawyer. It's your job. And it doesn't always just have the support of the general public, because people are, justifiably so horrified about this crime. But they're entitled to the best defense they can get. And if you're on the defense side, you've got to do a more than competent job on something like this.
And I know you used to work as a prosecutor as well. And I think from the defense side, it seems like kind of figuring out the why is important to the defense, and maybe a reason why not, and saying that, trying to mount a defense for the clients. Do you need a motive though? How important is the motive part of it, even if that's being debated right now? How important is that to what the prosecutors will need to prove?
Right. Bottom line is you don't need a motive. You don't have to establish to a jury, well, this is why they did this. You simply have to establish as the prosecutor that beyond a reasonable doubt in the case of a trial, that these two young men, 14 and 16 years old, did this act. They took her out to the woods. They shot her. They burned her body. According to the prosecution, it was premeditated. It was planned. And that establishes what you need for premeditated first-degree murder. You do not have to establish a motive. A lot of times a jury, of course, wants to know, like anybody else, how could you do something like this, especially in a case involving such young suspects and a murder victim. A jury is always going to want to know that, and prosecutors can certainly provide that information in terms of how they see the case coming together. But it's not an element. It's not something that they have to prove in order to get a first-degree premeditated murder conviction.
Yeah, and we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, very, very much in the beginning stages. You feel for Danika Troy's family, her mom. They seemed incredibly close. Whatever the motive may be, just a very, very sad case out of Florida. Criminal defense attorney John Day. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for talking about this one with us.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.